program.
Morning.
All right, so let's throw forward. What is South Africa going to look like in terms of its economy next year?
Look, I think it's always very difficult to say, what the economy will do. I think if you look at global markets, still there's some pressure. We do see the American markets doing well. We do believe that there's some sort of recovery, but it's always interesting to look at the global economy to see whether there will be an impact and what that will impact, obviously what that impact will be on South Africa and how we can go forward on the South African and emerging markets. We definitely see, the growth rate in the emerging markets being quite strong. It's a difficult one going forward to actually understand the impact of the States and the impact of China, obviously, on those changes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've seen exceptional growth in some African and emerging markets, but these are emerging markets and they do start evening out. I mean, we've seen some growth rates of around about 10%.
Yes.
Is this going to taper down? I mean, is that the reality?
I think if you look at emerging markets, you need to look at different pockets of the emerging markets. Obviously, China's on a different path. If you look at Africa specific, Africa, there's a big focus on investment in Africa. There's a big focus on getting back into the growing economies. I think worldwide people are seeing their return on investment being fairly slow in the developing economies. So obviously, emerging market does provide that additional return for the investors. At this point in time, certainly Africa is an opportunity for investors.
Well, it's good news. But let's bring BRICS into the bigger picture. What does it mean for BRICS?
I think the BRICS countries are very different to the rest of the world in a sense that they've got a different focus. Obviously emerging, if you look at China over a longer period, they had very good growth prior years, a little bit of a slowdown over the last 18 months, 2 years. I think if you go forward, you need to understand, obviously China is a big player, India is a big part of that, so we need to understand their economies. And I think if you want to bring it back home in terms of South Africa, the big countries and their developments obviously make a big difference in our economy and how we develop going forward. So if you compare South Africa to the rest of Africa, we do lag behind in certain areas, and I think that's a concern if you look forward 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, let's now focus particularly on agriculture and having a look at something like exchange controls, because I have no doubt that came up in conversation last night.
Exchange control is, the exchange control is a different issue for the farmer than the actual exchange and managing the exchange, right? For the farmer particularly, they look at the exchange rate. They want to understand how the economy is going to react so that they can get a better price for their product when they export. I think the important thing for them is maybe to focus on how to manage that on a 6-month period or 8-month period, specifically when the harvest period starts. And that's the important part for the farmer and for the agricultural environment. Obviously, when the exchange rate do appreciate, and get stronger, the rand getting stronger, it's good in the sense that, farmer products can be imported cheaply. I think if it devalues, it's good for the exporters. So it's always a bit of a balancing act. But I think specifically for the farm and agriculture environment, we focus on exports in some areas, and that would be good for them.
Yeah, but sitting where we're at right now, I mean, it's very high levels.
Very high levels. Yeah. And it really creates a lot of volatility in the market because your exporter and your importer is not really sure where to focus on. And I think that's the difficulty.
Yeah. What does Afgri actually do? How does it fit into the country's economic activity?
Well, Afgri is a food-specific company, so we focus a lot on supporting farmer base and we focus a lot on the food cycle and obviously making sure that we provide service in the food industry. So we're very much a value player in the food environment.
And in terms of some of the discussions that took place last night, I imagine challenges in the farming industry were discussed. What are they? What are the biggest issues at the moment?
I think one needs to understand the food security issue in South Africa and in Africa. I think food security is a long-term play. There's a lot of people, so a lot of things in terms of what food security needs to be. The agricultural environment for us is really, you have weather pattern changes, you have coal mining activities that's actually using production land, and you get into an environment where you need to understand what is our 40, 50-year food security focus, and that is the discussion, and that should be a discussion between the private sector, the farmers and government, and I think all three parts of us needs to work together to actually solve that long-term problem.
All right, Chris, thank you for coming in. Thanks for chatting to us this morning. Chris Venter is the Chief Executive Officer of Afgri, having their annual meeting last night, talking about the future for South Africa and the economic landscape going forward.